good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, and welcome to everyone on Friday, Open Source Friday with Unity MCP. We're having Kevin join us today to talk about Unity MCP, which is a bridge allowing AI assistants to directly integrate with the Unity game developing editor with an MCP client. So super excited to kind of talk about game development and AI tools and have a little fun today. Kevin, would love to have you introduce yourself to the team across Open Source Friday, and looking forward to some fun.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me. As you said, I'm also named Kevin. I come from a long history of game development. I've been in the industry almost 20 years from the engineering perspective. Most of my experience has been in large AAA game development. I was at Blizzard Entertainment for a long time, worked on various projects. But in the last couple of years, I've been more focused on kind of the tooling space and AI applications in game dev. How do we accelerate the industry? And I was just realizing right now, like, this is actually the third company I've been at where I've been working on open source tools for like AI in game development. Like you're saying right now. Yeah, I just realized that. So we're talking about the Unity MCP tools. At my last company, we're working on more of the art pipelines, trying to make an open source package management for sharing art and PCG tools for games. And before that, at Blizzard, I was one of the main developers behind the collaboration with Google DeepMind, where we made an AI that could play StarCraft 2. And we tried to cultivate a community of kind of hobbyists to kind of build AIs that can play video games. So I've kind of had many eras of open source AI and game dev.
Yeah, I mean, the intersection of all of that has definitely adjusted over a decade. I remember when I first started kind of in the AI space, probably about almost over a decade ago, we were looking at how AI could be within the tooling space within game development too, mostly around like simplifying the process and making it easier to produce games. And it's interesting to see how far we've come in 15 years or so. I imagine the same, you've kind of thought the same thing. Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us today. Maybe just to kind of kick it off a little bit, I'd love to get your background, not just in kind of open source and game dev, but like how did Unity MCP come together? Like how did you think about the project? Where did it, the idea come from? And then, we'll kind of jump in from there.
Yeah. This project has an interesting history. It's kind of like jumped around between multiple different like maintainers and collaborators. It's really been that like open source perspective. I think it kicked off like early last year. There was a VR developer, Justin, who just did it as like a side project, as a hobby to show it off. And he put it up on GitHub, free open source, and it kind of exploded. Like people found a lot of value out of it. Like nowadays in the industry, there's so many hobbyists. Just thinking back on my own career, like 10, 20 years ago, the accessibility of these tools is like so much greater now. You can just download Unity, try it out. There's so many more people that can watch YouTube videos, tutorials, try it out.
Yeah.
So the intersection of the accessibility of this stuff plus this like really like great project from Justin really like exploded. So as he kind of started working more on that, he started collaborating with this company called CoPlay. So there's a number of developers there like Yos that he started working with for a while, and they tried to build more of a product around it, but still keeping the open source core, free and maintained. And then in like the last month, we kind of brought in more people into the team. So there's another company we're now collaborating with, which I kind of come in from, called Aura and Ramen VR. So we work more on kind of Unreal Engine development tools. Okay. So we're now working with them on the Unity space as well to kind of build this platform to, empower game developers across the whole ecosystem to, make great games.
That's awesome.
And it all comes. Yeah.
Like maybe just double clicking with that. Like, I mean, coming across Unity and Unreal, like how are you seeing these tools kind of come across the intersection of AI tooling specifically? Like, I'm kind of curious about that as a topic.
Yeah. I mean, like they're very different ecosystems, Unity and Unreal, but in reality, like the core problems are very similar. Like, so the applications are very, I kind of explain it in terms of like when you work on games, a lot of people think about it as I want to put a character in my scene that can run around. That seems like a pretty simple operation, but under the hood, it's actually pretty complicated. There's a lot of different types of assets and data files that can be configured. There's like scripts, there's like text assets like JSON, there's binary assets like images and 3D models, and you have to also configure them in the right way and also hook them all together to make it work. So a simple character like place in my scene, walk around, there might be like an input system you have to configure. It might be like a 3D model you got to hook in, a script for the movement you got to hook in, animation you got to put on top. And those problems are very similar between Unity and Unreal. And the solution to those problems and how you approach it from an AI perspective is also very similar. So there's a lot of overlap, even though the tech is different. The high-level problems are very similar.
That makes sense. And maybe kind of double clicking. So you're kind of coming at this tool from two different ecosystems right now.
Yeah.
How are the communities kind of fusing around it? Do you see this becoming like the Unity bridge to Unreal, or like, how does that work together?
I think people kind of exist on one side of the fence or the other.
Okay.
When you're making a game, you kind of commit to one and make your game in this kind of tool set. The stuff you build doesn't really translate. So it's more so that like we're taking the learnings we've had from Unity and Unreal to kind of like share across both of those. So if we build really good tech for understanding like the spatial layout of a scene, that's going to be applicable to both tool sets. So we can kind of like give value to both communities. And the same thing from the community perspective, if someone's using the Unity tool set and they give us really great feedback about the UX, how this tool should work, that feature is probably going to be something desired by the Unreal side as well. They're very similar developer experiences. So there's kind of commonality, even though the communities are kind of like independent.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. I know I kind of derailed that into like an ecosystem discussion, but maybe coming back to the actual tool itself, like maybe talk a little bit more about kind of where it's at in terms of features, capabilities, like where you see it going, and we can kind of jump into some of the details around the project.
Yeah. So I think, like you mentioned, this is a MCP project. So the main goal of this is to allow agents and LLMs to interact with Unity, to allow you to kind of modify and inspect Unreal and Unity assets. And for Unity, like I mentioned earlier, one of the main challenges to working in these ecosystems is there's such a diversity of different asset types, and understanding how they all work and how to configure them is kind of complicated. And then the second layer is once you know how to kind of configure a script, how to hook it all together is complicated. So I would say those are kind of the two main things that AI can help empower developers for. So by having MCP tools, we can take all this diversity of assets and expose them to the LLM in a format it can understand. So that's the first value the kind of project provides, is like there's all these different asset types. We've done the work to kind of build tools to kind of cleanly serialize them into a form that LLMs can understand, to kind of read it. And then all from the other perspective, if you want the LLM to kind of help you build something, there needs to be an interface for the LLM to like output some text that can then affect your scene. So there's kind of an input process as well on a per asset basis. So there's that kind of like that bridge on a per asset type. And then as kind of a second layer, there's like, how do you connect things together? So there's just, some general best practices that we kind of like encode in the tools to help it learn how to like connect the model to a script. Just kind of some common patterns that, you can help it along with. So those are kind of the two categories I think the tools like are focused on helping with.
Interesting. And then maybe as you think about like how it's helping, like how is the community like distribution of it right now? Like how are you finding people find the project, engage with it? Maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. It's always hard to tell like where the community come from. It's just kind of like I mentioned, when the project went on GitHub, it kind of exploded. And being engineers, we're not really good like marketing business people, so it just kind of like blew up. So thank you to GitHub, I guess, for being a good platform to give us visibility. But yeah, so there's a GitHub community, and the standard pull requests and comments and feedback. But we also have a Discord community that we cultivate. So people in there kind of sharing feedback and collaborating on ideas as well. Those are kind of the two main communities and touch points we have to maintain the project.
There's a question that came up, and maybe you can kind of help clarify, but someone asked, is it similar to Blender MCP? And it might be good to just kind of provide a little bit of clarity around like how the tool differs, like what it does, why it does different things.
Yeah. So Blender and MCP. So MCP is just a general protocol for how you expose like a program to an LLM. So there's a lot of different MCP projects that can, make that bridge to different programs. So Blender MCP, I haven't seen it myself, but I can imagine it's a similar concept. They have an agent that wants to interact with Blender and its functionality that it can provide. So by making that MCP bridge, it can allow the LLM to kind of interact with Blender. So that concept is the same. In terms of Blender, the functionality of Blender is more focused around 3D modeling and sculpting models. and for kind of scenes and lighting. So that tool is often used in game dev pipelines. So you might like make your model and sculpt it in Blender, and then you might export it and then put it into Unity to actually play the game. But the Unity program is less about 3D modeling, but more about the gameplay and connecting things together. So they're similar tools, and MCP is a similar kind of like application of that pattern, but they're a bit different.
That makes sense. And I mean, maybe double clicking just a little bit is like, I imagine developers may use different tools at different times. Like there's nothing that necessarily like predisposes them to do 3D rendering for other development aspects within game development. But like for this specific application, like the Unity MCP will help with developing the world within the game engine itself. Is that like a good? Yeah.
Yeah, it's more for like the layout of the level and like the gameplay behavior of how things behave when you interact with them. But one of the nice things about MCP, kind of backing out, is that you can hook in multiple different MCP clients into like your Claude Code or whatever your agent is. So it actually enables workflows like you were saying might be useful of, you just ask Claude to make a model and put it in my scene, where it might be able to kind of call into the Blender MCP to kind of make a model, and then call into the Unity MCP to kind of hook it up into the game. So these things actually kind of collaborate pretty well in terms of a modular system.
That makes sense. Yeah. Cool. And maybe like before we jump into like the details of it, but like how talk about a little bit how the project actually integrates with Unity today. Like what is the capability, and like how do you see, obviously it's like installing an MCP server, I imagine from like the Claude Code side, but like maybe talk through a little bit about the semantics and the capabilities of how it integrates with it.
Yeah. Once I get into the demo, I can give you like a more specific technical kind of a description of where the pieces are. But in terms of the capabilities, I think I'm kind of saying the same thing, but like one of the main benefits is there's separate MCP tools for different asset types. So to be more specific, like the scene spatial understanding to kind of place things in the scene, another tool for like the UI to make a widget layout of like a health bar for your character, another one for adding a script into the level. So it's kind of a suite of tools for every individual asset type. That's kind of how I would describe the high level of what the feature set is.
Super helpful. And then I'm going to pull up this question too. Does the Unity MCP tool work with ProBuilder?
I'm not sure offhand what ProBuilder is. Is that a?
I think it's
AI?
more of a Unity like custom tool developer for like specific objects. And here I'll drop the ProBuilder link here just so folks have it. But essentially, yeah, it's a custom tool developer within Unity itself. So I imagine there's some like rendering of the objects in the world within Unity, and then how that would interact with the actual MCP server, so that if you're building,
the Unreal or a Unity MCP, it's designed to work with kind of the built-in Unity types, because it doesn't really know about this other plugin. But if that other plugin, the result of it creates objects in your scene, then yeah, you can then interact with them with Unity MCP as long as they're the standard Unity file types. But I'm not as familiar offhand, so I can't really go that deep into it.
Yeah. And then there was another comment here too, specifically around like sending augmented scripts and automate functions. So it's sounding interesting, but like maybe talk about how you've used it yourself for some of these like custom scripts that you might have, and like what that looks like.
Yeah, I think that's one of the other things that these tools are quite good at. If you want to do some operations that are kind of tedious in your level, like you want to go through every light in my scene and I want to adjust the brightness by like 20%. It's kind of a pain to kind of go through and do manually. So tools like this can be really useful to kind of make a script that it can execute to kind of batch operate on your level. And there might have been ways to do it before in terms of like manually writing the script and then plugging it in. But with LLMs nowadays, they're really good at writing code. So by having an LLM then write the code for you, then execute it, it can really accelerate your workflow.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I imagine like part of this, I'd be curious, there's another question here, I won't pull it up on the screen, but like around beginner versus like experienced developer friendliness. And I imagine to that point, like using an AI powered coding tool allows you to accelerate for beginners of like non-technical game development to build these custom gaming scripts that then can go into the Unity engine without having to have the knowledge of Unity or even like the scripts themselves, right? Is probably like a benefit of this a little bit. So
I would give a couple framings there around that. I think one of the main benefits, one of the really great benefits of these tools for newcomers is that it's really good for like explaining how things work. If you get a tutorial, you can ask the AI, hey, how's this level kind of set up? And it's really good at making like documentation for you of explaining it. So it's a really good learning tool, just kind of like talk about how the game works. I will say on the other side of the fence, I don't think AI tech is quite at the point where it can like make a game for you and you have like no knowledge of how to make games. It can probably get things kind of stood up quickly, but as with every other code gen tool, I would kind of classify them as like, it's kind of like a new college grad. It has a lot of knowledge of all the systems. It's really eager to help you, but doesn't really have like the core architecture experience of how to build things that are like really robust. So if you kind of come to this tool and you're like, make me a fun shooter game, it's not going to do a very good job at making you a fun shooter game right away. All the same kind of prompt engineering best practices that you might have gotten through like usually Cloud Code or like Cursor, those also apply here. Like this, it's still kind of a skill how do you like craft the right question to get to what you want. But
I mean, that's actually like like some of the biggest challenges, right? Is like you have to be clear enough to guide and structure like the planning process before AI kicks off. Not that you couldn't get to the same outcome with like smithing and stuff like that, but obviously the more clear you are up front, the better the outcome down the road, right?
Yeah. But I will say to a newcomer with no experience, the experience now is like significantly easier than it was 5 years ago to come in and just make something fun. So it's still a lot better.
I'm going to drop in another question here, which I think is interesting, around agent orchestration. It's like, is this necessary? Like, how do you actually manage agents within the coding environment in this capability? Like, are you seeing that happen more? Do you have to add a different delegation frameworks, harnesses, things like that to make the AI work well with the MCP server?
I kind of see MCP as kind of a separate class of problem than agent orchestration. MCP is just like providing the functionality for like how to modify, things in your program. But I think the agent orchestration kind of world is kind of changing a lot, like month to month. Best practices works the best.
Sure.
So, over the last couple of years, we went from, typing a single prompt to like get output to go to more of like an agentic loop where it has a set of tools that it can kind of loop on to kind of call into your program. So we're now into a space with Cloud Code where it's getting really better at tools, and it's getting much better at like writing scripts to do tools. It's doing more programmatic tool calling. So there's a whole ecosystem of like agent orchestration that like it's changing so fast. It's hard to give like a clear answer of like what's good, because what's good today is probably different than what was a month ago. But the benefit of MCP is you can plug it into whatever the newest like best practices, and it still works and keeps up with the latest tech. That's one of the benefits of, I think, MCP.
Yeah, that makes sense. It kind of gives you like a little bit of an abstraction layer to that, and allows you a lot more flexibility. So that makes sense. There was another question too. Where'd it go? This one. How do you see it being used to simulate distribution shift and edge cases around like ML and vision systems? And I don't know actually if you actually do anything in that space, mostly around like, well, this is my naive aspect, but like I don't know if Unity has any vision training algorithms already built in for like custom models being built into it yet, but I don't know.
So it's about custom models to help you develop games, or maybe like
I think that's it. Like essentially using like the Unity data as like a training ML system, and so like can you build like custom models around it, like simulated worlds?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges for building like custom models for this stuff is we need a lot of training data to kind of like build robust models, and there's not that much data on like Unity scripts versus like nowadays agents are really good at web development because there's like tons of JavaScript and HTML that exist, and it's easy to scrape. But a lot of game development tools, it's a smaller community. And also a lot of the assets tend to be more binary file format. So they're not naturally like in the LLM's training data set. So you're kind of at a disadvantage to start. So then, okay, you have to now make a data set, like you're saying, to do like a like vision training to help you with games. I think there probably are people exploring that, and there's a whole category of world model of AI research going on right now that I think is going to kind of become more relevant in a couple of years. Of if you do want to make a game, if they actually have trained models that have general knowledge of world layout and scene understanding and spatial understanding, that might actually be a really great tool to, put together games. But that tech is kind of a couple years away, I think. So that problem
Yeah.
is coming up, but it's still like it is coming up, I think.
Yeah, coming up, but not quick.
Yeah.
Super helpful. Okay, maybe shifting gears. I know we've kind of like covered a lot of the project. Maybe jumping in. Do you want to do the demo, and then we can kind of keep continuing on with the conversation as folks see. So I'll pull up the demo on the screen, and so people can see it. Here we go.
So I just have a very like simple example set up just to kind of show the core data flow of like what this thing even is. And I can explain it from both the kind of user perspective of what you're going to use this tool for, and I can also dig into the technical details of how it works. I know this is like a coding stream, so I'm sure a lot of people are more technical. So at a high level, what I have on my screen here is I have a Unity window, and I have a basic starter project. So I have a scene with some boxes, nothing fancy. And then I have a Claude Code window here that I'm going to be using to interact with the scene. And the core project, the Unity MCP project, like we were talking about, it helps create that bridge between your AI agent and your scene. And in the upper right, I just have our Unity MCP server, which I'll explain in a minute. So as like the most basic thing, if I'm in Claude Code and I have it all hooked up, I can say, hey, tell me about my scene, like what's in my project right now. And by default, agents don't have connections to anything; they can't see anything. But one of the benefits of this project is it allows it to kind of call tools to reach into the scene, understand the state, and reason about it. So it's calling some tools. It kind of queried the scene. It kind of queried the hierarchy of objects in my scene. It's thinking about it. It'll give me a little summary of, okay, I have some boxes. Here's what the color they are. There's some little collectible stars in the level. Very basic example of, there's a data flow here where it can read assets. Where I think it gets more interesting is it actually taking action in the scene. So I'll give it another kind of very simple prompt. I'll just say, hey, I want to add some more boxes to my scene and put them in a circle. If you're trying to make a level layout for a game, you probably would have a more interesting prompt, but just an example of it also has the ability to use these MCP tools to reach into the scene to kind of add objects and modify the scene. So it's, there we go. So it reached in and it added some more cubes to my scene.
Cool.
So that's kind of the basic input and output.
Like while you're doing that real quick, like obviously you're adding things into it, and maybe you'll get to this, but like, how do you think about like adaptive agents within this environment so that it's like continuously learning based off of input or any like metadata you're coming from Unity to like feed back into your agent? Like, does that work today, or are you seeing that?
So I think there's two things there. There's one, you could frame that question as a verification loop where it can kind of check its work and do a better job by inspecting what it did and get feedback on itself. A second tier there is like actually training the model based on what it's done. That's kind of a harder problem.
Yeah,
but I think
like on the verify, let's start with that, because then like we can have a side conversation on like the other modeling aspect.
That's kind of the harder deep end. But like that verification loop, I think, is one of the key insights that is coming up lately. I think that's a good call out. That one of the biggest issues using LLM tools in general right now is they kind of hallucinate. They try to do their best effort to make a change, but they kind of often get it wrong. So you end up being in this loop where like you ask it for something, you got to check it again in 10 seconds and kind of correct it and give it feedback. But one of the best ways to get leverage out of these AI tools is to have a verification loop like that. So for example, if you're trying to have it make a gameplay script for you, but then you have like a simple like test harness, or you have like unit tests or some way it can like programmatically verify its work. Or even in this case, another useful tool is if it could take a screenshot of the screen and like look at it what it did. Is it actually in a circle? If it could verify that visually, it would give it feedback. So that is kind of like the next step, I think, of this class of tools. We have a basic integration, but the more you can kind of give it those feedback loops, the more it can be effective and check its own work. So
how do you like part of that feedback loop is like knowing how to create the right evals to benchmark against? Like, I'm curious for a non-traditional game developer, like how do you start with like how do you think about good evals in this space so that you can actually get the right outcomes?
Yeah. We do a bunch of like thinking about that internally as we try to build these tools. It's hard. Making evals is surprisingly hard. Like you want to pick problems that the goal of it obviously is to test the quality of your product. So you want to have questions that are representative of what users will do. That's the first thing. Mm-hmm. You also want to have questions that are easy to verify. So there's a clear like solution that you can say yes or no to give it feedback. You want to have something that can probably run quickly so it doesn't take too long. And you also want to have a problem where the kind of like diversity of output it could make is more restricted. So if you had an eval that was like, make my game more fun, that's like a very like broad output of what it could be.
Good luck.
But so it's like hard to verify when the output is like so abstract. So you also want evals to be like very precise of like, I want to make this box follow the player within 2 meters. Make a script to do that. That's like easy to verify as a good like example of an eval. So there's these qualities you try to think about of how do you make this, all those qualities. And then if you do, then that really helps you as you're developing these tools and tuning the system prompts. Because that's one of the biggest challenges making these systems. LLMs are very like black box. And if you change the system prompt here, it could have like unknown effects on all the other behavior. Yeah, they're pretty random. So having kind of clean evals to always verify your work, that you're not breaking things, is really useful when you're doing general AI development. But kind of digressing into the implementation side there.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And like on that note though, like on the implementation side, who are you seeing like pick this up right now? Like, is it more like seasoned developers of games today? Is it more like the non-seasoned? Like who is actually implementing it right now?
So there are definitely different like groups of people. I think there's definitely a large hobbyist community because it's just so accessible and it's just kind of fun on the weekend, vibe code game. So I think that's definitely a community that's growing. But I also do think there's a lot of industry professionals that are trying to get more and more into these tools. So in terms of how this project is structured, it's Unity MCP. There is an open source core to all these tools that you can just use for free. There's also kind of a productized version of it called CoPlay, which is more of a kind of packaged version that's more for sale for larger customers or hobbyists too. So we're kind of targeting both of those demographics. And I will say in general, there is a lot of interest also from the industry. Like I'm sure you're aware, in the tech industry in general, there's tons of layoffs and struggle right now, and especially in the game development industry, there's also again like a lot of layoffs, studios closing, kind of budget constraints. So there's a lot of eagerness of people to learn how could you potentially use this tech in production environments. That answer to that is hard. So people are trying to figure it out and try it out and see what it actually works. So it's kind of an evolving target, but there's definitely interest on both sides of that fence, small and large.
Got it. That's super helpful. And I'm going to pull up a question here that I think is actually really interesting. So how do you, this goes back to the eval question, failure from the LLM reasoning versus failure by the game state engine or just something else that's like broken, which is, I think is an accurate question.
Yeah. Oh, I think, well, you want to have an eval that is like a reliable question. So if you're making an eval that's like, make a code change to the core engine state and like change how the renderer works, that's kind of a very deep change that has like a lot of chance to kind of break things. So it might be hard to distinguish between the LLM making a mistake and the engine just being kind of fragile. Yeah. So you kind of want to like target your questions and evals to be more like, I place things in my scene. It's kind of one of the common workflows you would use anyways in the UI. So hopefully it's more stable and not likely to break the engine.
Mm-hmm.
And that's commonly not really an issue anyways, because the goal of these tools is to empower people trying to build content. So the evals naturally are around the user flows that are, well tested and more robust. So it's not really an issue in practice. Obviously, you can probably detect like if it causes a crash, that's probably a good sign it was like an engine problem and not necessarily your LLM. But if it causes a problem where like the gameplay, the box can follow the player in like the right way, that's probably the LLM's fault. That was more of just like the runtime behavior being not what you desired. So in practice, it's not really a big issue.
Got it. That makes sense. Super interesting. There's some deeper questions here. I don't know if I can fully get through this one, but simulating distribution shift of changing objects and like lighting and placement. Does this MCP help towards the data generation pipelines and like creating this integrating with world models? Like I'll let you read the question because I think it's an interesting.
Yeah. I think it's not something that we're directly focused on, but there are people in the industry doing that. There's a lot of work on synthetic data generation.
Sure.
So for example, if you're doing like a startup doing self-driving cars, it's kind of hard to get data on, cars driving with your AI because you don't want to like crash and like. So they tend to like make a lot of simulations in game engines like Unreal or Unity, where they simulate a car driving around and they use that to record a video to then train a model that they then use in the real world. So there's a whole industry of synthetic data generation that uses this tech, not necessarily Unity MCP, but like game engines in general. So that is a thing that is out there, but not our current focus. We're focused mostly on the game developers making, experiences.
Yep, makes sense. Super cool. Let's go back to the demo.
Okay. Yeah, it's fine. I'm happy to digress into any part here.
Yeah.
So the last two things I was just going to show was I just showed the basic input output, but I had also mentioned one of the main goals of this tool set is just give you access to all the different like asset types. So I just showed create objects. So I can also say, hey, maybe do some scripting. So make a script that makes my boxes spin. So in Unity, a lot of the gameplay is done with C# scripts. So it'll actually write a C# script, attach that onto my boxes, and be able to execute it. You could also, and then just make sure that worked. Oh, it's still trying to attach the objects.
As that's going through, this question came in too. What about the decision making of the algorithm of a non-human player? So all of your like, agent-based players, how do they respond via the agents? And like, is that a use of the AI? Do people use it that way today?
Decision making algorithm.
More like NPCs, like kind of how they interact with the AI, and like but then it's like it's different from the coding of the MCP itself, or like the actual like building of the game environment versus the AI itself.
Yeah, I would say there's two different categories of AI in games. And just showing off here, my boxes are spinning. It did a good job, putting scripts on them. There's kind of the phase of developing the content for the game, like you're a developer making the level layout, writing the scripts. And then there's the runtime aspect. Like while a player is playing the game, do you want dynamic behavior of NPCs that chat with you with like, custom dialogue? Those are kind of two separate problems. And Unity MCP is more focused on the first, which is like, I'm a developer making the content up front. It's not so much the runtime NPC behavior.
Super helpful. Interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay, back to the.
That's okay. I'll just rattle through some examples. Well, if you throw more questions at me, that's fine. So it can make scripting. Also it can also make like UI layouts. So if you have a game that has like a health bar with your player name, it can also help build the UI layout for that. So I'll give it a little prompt to make a health bar for me. It can also do things like change the materials on the level. It can like change the lighting. So there's a lot of diversity of asset types in the game.
Super cool.
And I think we have pretty good coverage of it, but I think that's one of the things that we could always use more help on from the community perspective of, are there things that we don't have good coverage of can they contribute like a new tool to help do a better job at like UI widgets? Or is the behavior not tuned very well? Does it mess up with some new UI type? They can always help add support for that. So hopefully this is finished. Oh, I think it made a little mistake there. My UI, it made a layout of like some text, didn't quite make my health bars properly.
Oh yeah. Interesting.
It did this for me in practice for this. It gives me an error message, and if I give it the error message, last time it was smart enough to fix it. So let's see.
That's actually one of the things I find really interesting is you can just feed it like the raw errors, and it's smart enough to figure that out. I think it's
there we go.
Really, yeah, there you go. Done.
There we go. I figured it out. So yeah, I made a health bar, MP, mana. So just an example of it. It can do like UI layouts for you as well.
That's awesome. And have you seen any like edge cases that it seems to struggle with at all, or does it seem to be pretty easy to kind of I'm just kind of curious if that's been an issue at all.
Yeah, honestly, like when I was coming into developing these tools, I've been pretty impressed by like the baseline knowledge of how to hook assets together. It definitely lacks in how to actually interface with modifying an asset. But in terms of the second problem of like how do I connect things together, my player, my script, my model, my animation, it does a surprisingly good job at understanding how to do that out of the box. I guess there's a sufficient number of forum posts online of people talking about it that it has good baseline knowledge.
Yeah, that makes sense. Super cool. And maybe kind of like an adjacent to this, like this is just the MCP layer itself. Like how are you thinking about like other protocols within like game dev? Like, are you looking at A2A or like any of the other like more AI specific protocols, whether that's on like commerce capabilities, things like that built into these? Like, I'm just kind of curious, like how you think about where game dev's going forward.
I think for this specific project, it's kind of scoped to just like modifying,
Sure.
Unity assets and scenes. But yeah, I definitely do see a broader ecosystem of AI tools. I think all game companies right now are trying to explore, how to apply this tech, especially the last couple of years with LLMs and agents.
Yeah.
Both in terms of like the workflows of developers, the workflows of, business people understanding the market, even like in game like NPCs, like we were talking about. So I think all that stuff is being worked on by a lot of companies, and I think the next like 5 years is going to be very interesting to see how it all plays out. So that's personally why I'm kind of like in the pool here, working with these tools. It's just a very exciting time as an engineer. Things are changing so much that like it's just fun to be here for the ride. I don't know exactly where it's going to go, but I don't know. It's just fun to work on.
It is fun. I love it. And maybe like just kind of double clicking a little bit on the project itself, like how are you interacting with community right now? Like, do you seek other contributors, maintainers, support across the project? Like, what does that look like now? Or like, how can people get involved with it today?
Yeah, I called out, I think one of the main things is our Discord community. There's a Discord chat where you can talk about, feature requests and bugs and support and share the stuff you made with the tool. I'd recommend that as kind of the main point of contact. It's kind of a sub community inside of the CoPlay Discord. CoPlay is like the larger company that has more of the productized version, but we do support the core open source as well. So I would check out the CoPlay Discord.
Helpful. And then maybe one last question as we kind of like close up, like how do you find people like, how can they get started with the project, use it, kind of engage with you, things like that?
I think just try to make a game with it. Have some fun. This is game development. You should just jump in, get Unity, and try to make a game and figure out, like, as a developer trying to make something, like, where does it fall short? Like, it's going to have holes and things it's not as good at. So just like trying to test the product and give us feedback of where the holes are is super valuable. We get so pigeonholed on what we're working on right now of trying to get like the scripting to work better. We kind of lose perspective on the overall experience of someone fresh coming in making a game from scratch. So yeah, just have fun. That's my advice.
I love it.
It's all free, open source, so no barriers.
Yeah, and are you like, obviously this video is a good like tutorial to it, but like, do you have any other like tutorials or like documentation to get started, or where to go?
That is a good question. I think the CodePlay website has a documentation section. It definitely has like setup instructions. I would definitely also look at the GitHub project. The GitHub has a README on the main page with like
Okay.
setup instructions, how to set it up. Yeah, so maybe I would say the GitHub README is a good starting point, and that links you
I
up to
like
other
it.
things like documentation.
I love it. Any other like things you want to show in the demo or want to call out on the project before we kind of wrap up for the day?
Um, no, I just have more examples of like
Yeah, feel free
I
to
can
keep going in the.
I'll just keep running them in the background while you finish up. I want to maybe change my lighting to be like nighttime, so it can also change like the atmosphere of the scene. But yeah, I mean that's about it. It helps you modify assets, change your scene, and make your game accelerate your workflow. Try to make something fun. So,
I like it.
it's nighttime.
Oh, that's super cool. I like that.
Well, it's
That's
really dark.
amazing.
It's midnight now.
And then like once it's done, like how do you publish the game itself? Can you do that from the agent itself? Do you have to follow like standard Unity processes? Like what does that look like?
Yeah, I think you just follow standard Unity processes.
Okay.
I think there's like a make a build button somewhere in here that you can then publish. So it's not really in the scope of the AI tools that we're working on.
Sure. Totally
Yeah.
get it. Sometimes
Yeah.
like the tool being focused and scoped is a lot better than having to make it too bloated. So I totally get that.
Yeah.
Super cool. Well, thank you for joining us today. This was an
Okay.
awesome overview of the project. I think for folks that joined, got a really good overview of what's coming, both in terms of game development and capabilities there, but also like how these agents and kind of AI-powered coding assistant tools can interact with it through MCP. And yeah, I think you called it out too. Is like open source is clearly a pathway to getting access to these tools early, and engaging with it and building with it as well. So super cool.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. Appreciate it. And thanks everyone for joining us. And stay tuned for next week. We'll have more folks. We're excited for you all to join. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful Friday. Take care.